London doesn't do anything small. Even its grief is vast. Even its silence is loud. That morning, the morning they carried her, the sky came down low over the city like it was trying to listen. Like it needed to hear everything. Every sob swallowed behind gloved hands. Every boot on cobblestone. Every bell that didn't stop, didn't stop, didn't stop. Kate had been awake since 4. Not because anyone woke her. Not because a lady-in-waiting knocked softly and said it's time, ma'am. She'd been awake because sleep had simply decided it had no business being there. Not that morning. It had packed itself quietly and left somewhere around 3, leaving her staring at the ceiling of a room that felt enormous and cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. She lay still for a long time. Just listening. The palace has a sound at night that most people never hear. A low, institutional hum. Pipes. Old wood settling. The distant murmur of staff already moving through corridors, already beginning the choreography of a day that the rest of the world would watch but could never truly enter. She knew that sound the way you know a house you've lived in long enough, not consciously, just in your body, the way your feet find the floor in the dark without looking. She got up. Went to the window. The mall was already lined. Even now, at 4:30 in the morning, people had been there for hours. Some of them had been there for days. She could see the shapes of them in the gray dark, hunched in sleeping bags, propped against barriers, clutching thermoses with both hands. Ordinary people who had come from ordinary places to stand in the cold and say goodbye to a woman most of them had never met. Kate stood at the window a long time. She thought about the first time she had truly understood what the Queen was. Not the institution. Not the crown. The woman. It had been a small thing, a private moment, the kind that gets folded away and kept. The Queen had been looking at a photograph on a side table. Just looking at it. And something in the angle of her head, the slight drop of her shoulders, had made Kate catch her breath. She had looked, in that moment, exactly like someone's grandmother missing someone. That was the thing no portrait ever captured. The weight of private love carried inside a public life. 70 years of it. 70 years of showing up, of standing straight, of never letting the face say what the heart was doing. Kate understood that weight differently now than she had at 29, standing in Westminster Abbey in a dress the whole world was photographing. She understood it in her bones now. In the particular exhaustion of being always visible and never fully seen. She turned from the window. Her outfit for the day was laid across the chair, black, immaculate, each element chosen with the precision of someone who knew that every inch of her would be read and interpreted and reported. That was the contract. You showed up. You wore the right things. You stood in the right places. And, inside all of that, underneath all of that, you carried whatever you actually felt like a stone in your chest. Her children had asked, the evening before, where great-granny had gone. She had answered them carefully. Truthfully. With the soft vocabulary of loss that you offer small people, something about being somewhere peaceful, somewhere beautiful, somewhere without pain. George had listened with the too still face of a boy trying to be older than he was. Charlotte had cried openly, which was somehow easier to hold. Louis had simply reached up and patted Kate's face with one small hand, the way you comfort someone when you don't have the words yet but you understand the shape of the sadness. She had held it together until he did that. Then, she'd excused herself to the bathroom for 3 minutes and pressed a cold flannel against her face and breathed until she was composed again. Composed. That was the word they all used. That was the thing that was always required. She was composed now. Standing in her room at 4:45 in the morning, composed, watching London hold its breath outside her window. A lady-in-waiting appeared at the door, quiet as a question. Ma'am. It's nearly time. Kate nodded. She crossed to the chair. Began to dress. Outside, the bells started again. The procession route had been walked by staff a dozen times. Every position measured, every pace calculated, every contingency considered. The royal family moved through grief with the same institutional precision with which it moved through everything, not because the feeling wasn't real, but because the precision was how the feeling was contained. The formality was not a denial of sorrow. It was its vessel. Kate understood this. She had come to understand it the way you come to understand a foreign language, gradually, then, fluently, and, finally, in a way where you stop noticing you've switched. She stood in the staging area, that strange liminal space before a procession begins, where everyone is in position but nothing has moved yet, and she was aware of William beside her, of the children further back in the line, of the sheer weight of the occasion pressing down on the day like a hand on the top of your head. She could feel the crowd even before she could see them. It was something she'd never been able to explain to anyone outside this life. The way thousands of people's grief becomes a physical thing. A warmth. A low-frequency hum in the chest. Like standing near a very large engine that isn't making noise so much as making presence. William glanced at her. She glanced back. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. 24 years they'd known each other, that's most of her adult life, she thought, and the thought arrived with a kind of startled tenderness, the way simple arithmetic sometimes lands harder than the numbers suggest. He knew, without her saying, what she was holding. She knew, without asking, what he was. The coffin moved. And everything else began. The sound of the cortege is something no recording ever quite captures. It isn't just the music, though the music alone is enough to break you open, the slow measured notes that carry no comfort but enormous dignity. It's the sound underneath it. The breathing of a crowd of hundreds of thousands, somehow synchronized into a collective inhale that never fully releases. The shuffle of feet. The distant, isolated sound of someone crying, not dramatically, not loudly, just privately weeping into the cold morning air because there is nothing else to do. Kate walked. Step. 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 Each one measured. Each one placed. Her face composed, her spine straight, her eyes fixed in the middle distance in that particular way you learn, not blank, not absent, but held. Present without being exposed. Feeling without performing the feeling. But she was feeling it. God, she was feeling it. The thing about grief, the specific texture of this grief, was how layered it was. There was the personal loss, the woman she had known, the private face behind the public one. And, beneath that was something larger and harder to name. The sense of an era closing. The sense of a particular kind of steadiness leaving the world. The Queen had been constant in a way that very few things are constant, a fixed point that had simply always been there, like a particular star, and you hadn't known how much you navigated by it until it was gone. That was the disorientation that kept arriving in unexpected moments. Not she is gone. But where is North now? Kate kept walking. The crowd lined the route 10, 15, 20 deep in places. She could see faces as she passed, ordinary faces, wet with cold or tears or both, the faces of people who had brought their children, their elderly parents, their complicated feelings about what all of this meant. A woman clutching flowers she would never be able to leave because she couldn't get close enough. An older man standing perfectly straight, chin up, not crying, watching with an expression that was beyond grief, something older than grief. Recognition, maybe. The face of someone watching the last chapter of a book they'd been reading their whole life. Kate looked at him for just a moment as she passed. He couldn't know she'd seen him. She wouldn't forget his face. There is a particular cruelty to public grief. Not the grief itself, the grief is honest, the grief is clean in its own way, the grief does what grief does. The cruelty is the requirement to perform it correctly while experiencing it genuinely. To be simultaneously inside the feeling and outside yourself, watching yourself move through the feeling, making sure the feeling doesn't move you in ways that are wrong for the cameras, for the moment, for the hundreds of thousands watching from the street and the hundreds of millions watching from everywhere else. Kate had been trained for this. Not formally, no one sat her down and said, "Here is how you grieve in public." But she had absorbed it. The way you absorb things in this life, through proximity and repetition and the slow understanding of what is required. She had absorbed it from the woman in the coffin ahead of her. That thought arrived like a fist in the chest. She let it. Held it. kept walking. Westminster Abbey was cold in a way that felt intentional, like the cold itself was participating in the occasion. The stone held it, centuries of it, the cold that accumulates in very old places where very consequential things have happened, where the air has been breathed by so many people carrying so much. Kate had stood in this abbey before. She had stood here in a white dress with her heart hammering and the whole world watching, and something that felt like joy so enormous it was almost frightening. She remembered the moment she'd come through those doors that morning, a different morning, a spring morning, sun cutting through the stained glass, and had looked down the aisle and found William's face and felt, in that specific instant, that everything complicated had simplified. She stood here now with the same man and completely different feelings and the same stone walls around them. Life is strange. Life is circular in ways that are either comforting or unbearable depending on the day. Today it was both. The service moved through its architecture. Hymns that had been sung in this space for hundreds of years, the words known in the body before the mind finds them. Scripture read in voices that held steady because holding steady was the last and most intimate gift anyone could offer. Tributes that try to locate, in language, something that language is constitutionally unequipped to contain. Kate listened. She sang when it was time to sing. She held very still when stillness was what was needed. But something was building in her through the service, not breaking, not cracking, but building. A pressure behind the sternum. The specific accumulation of held feeling that happens when you have been composed for many hours and the composure has become its own kind of weight. She thought about small things. This is a thing she had learned about herself in difficult moments, when the large feelings became unnavigable, her mind found small things and clung to them. A private lifeline. It was not a denial of the large things. It was a way of remaining functional inside them. She thought about a particular afternoon, she couldn't have said exactly when, sometime in the last few years, when the Queen had asked her something unexpected. Something genuinely curious, the kind of question that strips away the formality of occasion and becomes just two people talking. She couldn't even remember now what the question had been. She remembered the quality of the moment. The sense of being genuinely seen by someone who saw an enormous number of people and maintained, somehow, the capacity to see each one specifically. That was the gift. That was the extraordinary, exhausting, unreplicable gift. To have lived 96 years, to have carried the weight of a crown and a nation and a century, and still to have that, still to be present, specifically and genuinely, to the person in front of you. Kate thought, I want to learn that. I want that to be something I carry forward. The thought arrived with something almost like resolve. Grief and purpose braided together. The specific feeling of loss transmuting, not into something lesser, but into something with direction. And then, it was time. The part that no one had discussed and everyone understood. The part that would come near the end, when the coffin would move from the abbey into the next stage of its final journey, and the family would stand as it passed, and there would be a moment, not choreographed, or rather, choreographed in the sense that everyone knew what the body required of itself, what the heart required, what the occasion required, when those who stood there would say goodbye. Not in words. The body would do it. Had to do it. The gesture that royalty uses when words are insufficient, when the space between a person and an occasion becomes too large for language to cross. The curtsy. She had curtsied before, many times. It is a practice thing, a learned thing, a thing of muscle memory and protocol. It can be performed with complete technical correctness and no inner content whatsoever. Kate had seen that version. Had perhaps, in her earliest days, produced that version, the form without the feeling, the shape without the weight behind it. This would not be that. The coffin approached. She was aware of everything and nothing, simultaneously aware of the people around her, of the cameras she could not see but knew were everywhere, of her children's presence somewhere in her peripheral consciousness, of William beside her. And she was aware of something that had no name in protocol or procedure. The particular intimacy of grief's final form. The way love, at the end of everything, becomes very quiet and very simple. Not the complicated love of relationship and history and the specific friction of two personalities in proximity. The bedrock underneath all of that. The thing that remains when everything else has been spoken or argued or laughed away. The thing that says, you mattered. You mattered specifically and, you mattered to me. The coffin came level with her. She curtsied. Not deeply and, then, up. Not the crisp social version. This was a descent, a slow, deliberate folding of herself downward, her head bowing as her body went, the physical language of reverence so total it moved past formality into something else. Something older. The deep grammar of the body that predates all protocol, the gesture that means, has always meant, across cultures and centuries, I am smaller than this moment. I acknowledge what this is. I bow to what cannot be stood upright before. She held it. 1 second. 2. 3. In those seconds something happened that she would not describe to anyone, that she would carry privately, that belonged only to her and, to the moment and, to the woman in the coffin who had taught her, without ever saying so explicitly, what it meant to show up. She rose. The coffin continued. The world kept moving. But, something had shifted, not broken, not released, but, settled. The way the land settles after an earthquake, finding its new configuration. The way you find your footing in a changed world by trusting that the ground is still there, even if it feels different beneath your feet. She stood straight. Kept her eyes forward. Let her face hold what it was holding. The composure was not a mask now. It was the form that love took when love had nowhere left to go but inward. The day doesn't end. That's the thing nobody tells you. You think, somewhere in the primitive part of your brain that still believes in the clean logic of narrative, that there will be a moment when it ends. When the last note is played and, the last door closes and, the last person says the last solemn thing and, then, you will be permitted, privately, to fall apart or put yourself back together or simply sit somewhere quiet and, let the day become the past. But, the day doesn't end. It keeps arriving in new rooms, new faces, new conversations that are all, underneath their surface politeness, the same conversation. The enormous conversation that the day has been having with itself since it began. Kate moved through it. Room to room. Face to face. The right words in the right order, produced with the precision of someone who has learned that words in these moments are not really about meaning, they're about presence. About offering the proof of yourself. I am here. I am with you in this. We are all in this together, this particular Tuesday in September that none of us will forget and, all of us will carry differently. At some point, she genuinely couldn't have said when she found herself in a quieter corridor. Not alone. There was staff nearby, there were always people nearby. But, a small pause. A gap between one obligation and the next. A space of perhaps 3 minutes where nobody was requiring anything from her. She stood in it. Didn't move. Didn't reach for her phone or speak to anyone or begin composing herself for whatever came next. Just stood in the gap and let the day rest against her for a moment. The corridor had a window. Outside, London was London. Changed and not changed. The crowds were dispersing, the long slow dispersal of hundreds of thousands of people with nowhere particular to be now that the thing they'd come for was over. The sky had gone from grey to darker grey, the particular London dark that is less like night arriving and, more like the city putting a coat on. She thought, she saw all of this. Every version of this sky. 96 years of this city's grey light. The thought was not sad, exactly. It was vast. Like standing at the edge of something and, understanding the scale of it for the first time. Later, when the last obligation of the day had been met, she went to find her children. George was reading. Or holding a book, which was not quite the same thing. The book was open but, his eyes were somewhere else, somewhere interior, doing whatever 9-year-old minds do when they're processing something too large for their current emotional vocabulary. He looked up when she came in and, she saw the question in his face that he was too careful to ask. She sat next to him. "How are you?" she said. Not the grown-up "how are you" that doesn't expect a real answer. The genuine one. He thought about it, which she appreciated. "I'm okay," he said. Then, was it hard? Today. She considered the easy answer. The protective answer. The answer that shelves the difficulty somewhere he doesn't have to reach it yet. She said, yes. It was hard. He nodded, and she saw something relax in him, the relief of being told the true thing, of having his own difficulty confirmed by someone who also found it difficult. She was important, he said. The way children state the things they've decided, definitively, out of their own reckoning. She was, Kate said. Very important. Charlotte came in then, already in her pajamas, trailing a stuffed animal and the particular energy of a child who has had a very long and serious day and is now deeply ready for the day to become night. She climbed into Kate's lap without asking, which was not a thing she often did anymore, and Kate wrapped her arms around her and didn't say anything, and Charlotte didn't say anything, and for a while that was sufficient. Louis was already asleep. She checked on him last, stood in his doorway, looked at the uncomplicated sleep of a 4-year-old who had been serious and good all day and, then, simply surrendered to unconsciousness the moment he was horizontal. His hand was open beside his face, the way small children sleep, utterly unguarded. She stood there longer than necessary. William found her, eventually, in the room they retreated to when the palace had done its thing and they were permitted, finally, to simply be themselves in a space. He sat in the chair across from her. Didn't speak right away. That was something she'd always been grateful for, the ability to be in a room together without filling it. The ease of shared silence after a long day of shared public obligation. After a while he said, "You held yourself today." Not a compliment, not exactly. More like a recognition. The kind of thing you say to someone you've watched carry something heavy across a long distance. "So did you," she said. He looked at her. The look that was its own kind of conversation, the one that said "I know" and "I saw you" and "I'm tired" and "we'll be okay" and a dozen other things that a look covers when language is too blunt an instrument. She thought about the curtsy. About that specific moment when she had gone down and held herself there and felt she would not describe it to him, not tonight, maybe not ever, because some things are so interior they become untranslatable even to the person who knows you best. She would not describe the specific quality of what had moved through her in those seconds. But she thought about it. The sense of completion and beginning folded inside the same gesture. The understanding, arriving not as an idea but as a physical fact, that grief and love are not sequential. First you love, then you grieve, then you move forward. They are simultaneous. They are permanent. The love doesn't end because the person ends. It changes form. It becomes part of how you inhabit yourself, part of the architecture of who you are. She had curtsied behind the coffin. Not to say goodbye. To say thank you. To say I am carrying this forward. To say I understand now what it means to keep going, to keep showing up, to stand straight even when standing straight is the hardest physical act in the world. To say I learned from watching you. The day ended. Eventually, truly, it ended. Kate lay in the dark and listened to the palace's hum, that low institutional sound, the pipes and old wood and the distant movement of staff, the sound of an institution that does not stop, cannot stop, will not stop. The constancy of it should have been comforting. Had always, mostly, been comforting. Tonight it felt different. Not worse. Just, she was aware of it differently. The way you become aware of the specific timbre of a voice once the voice is gone. The institution's hum was the same. The person at its center had changed. She would learn the new shape of it. They all would. She thought about spring mornings. About a dress and sunlight through stained glass and a face at the end of an aisle. About small hands patting her face. About a boy who held his book and looked at her and was ready, she could see it, to know the true things. About a woman standing in a room looking at a photograph with her shoulders carrying everything and showing nothing. About a curtsy. About how the body knows what to say when the mouth doesn't. About how love finds its form. She closed her eyes. Outside, London settled into its night. The bells had stopped. The grey sky held its dark. And everything that mattered, the carried things, the private things, the things that words can approach but never quite arrive at, remained. Remained, and continued. Continued the way things continue when they are real, quietly, without announcement, beyond the last page, into the ordinary days that come after.